Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a sports reporter and producer at ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And I've been trying to wrap my brain around the idea of the Kings drafting Shaedon Sharpe, and I can't do it. For a second, maybe a day, I had Shaedon Sharpe starting to creep up in the Keegan Murray and Jaden Ivey tier of this draft, at least in my mind on my board. And it really didn't last long. There's so many red flags, so many alarm bells, so much rejection going off in my head, so many reasons that I could lay out for why the Kings aren't the right team to draft him, from their inability to develop talent in the past, their current timeline, the amount of unknowns and concerns, the potential of Shaedon Sharpe's camp, those behind him, those who should be kind of off screen and behind the scenes, maybe making more decisions and having more influence than they should. And the Kings just went through a saga like that with Marvin Bagley and his camp. There are just so many reasons why it's like, you know what, it's not the right fit. It's not the right idea for the Sacramento Kings. However, I do acknowledge the talent. I do acknowledge the mixtapes. I do acknowledge the fact that Shaedon Sharpe might have the highest ceiling in the draft. Probably has a higher ceiling than both Jaden Ivey and Keegan Murray, but the floor significantly lower. While I don't think it's always the best play to go safe in the draft, taking that big of a risk for the Kings at this point in time just does not seem like the right decision for me. But instead of just taking my opinion and my understanding of what happened between Shaedon Sharpe and Kentucky, I thought now is the perfect time to get Kyle Tucker on. Kyle Tucker covers Kentucky basketball for The Athletic, does a phenomenal job doing that. And he is going to provide us with some insight, give us some idea of what went down, what the Shaedon Sharpe era was like, why he considers it a circus, and how he thinks Shaedon Sharpe's everything, not just his game, but his camp, his personality, everything is going to translate to the NBA. It's all right here on Locked On Kings. I've been on record as saying that I don't think the Sacramento Kings are the right team at all to consider drafting Shaedon Sharpe. And I think there are a lot of teams that are enamored with the mystery, but concerned with the what in the world happened at Kentucky. And here to help answer some of those questions, if he possibly can, is Kyle Tucker from The Athletic, who covers Kentucky basketball. And Kyle, you described Shaedon's time at Kentucky as a circus. I don't know how much time you need to explain what in the world happened, but how would you best summarize his time, the Shaedon Sharpe era of Kentucky basketball?
Well, it was a lot of really impressive layup line dunks pregame. We that's all we really saw of Shaedon Sharpe at Kentucky. They were very excited to sign him, the number one recruit at one point in his class. Then he sort of suddenly reclassifies in the fall. Everyone involved, he himself, his parents, his advisor, Dwayne Washington, who is heavily involved in the Canadian grassroots basketball, was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's guy. And so that was the connection to Kentucky. They had a mutual trust there, RJ Barrett and some others, Caleb Houston at Michigan. And all of those people, and especially Dwayne, who did most of the talking, but all of them at some point vowed, when he made his decision to suddenly he was graduated high school, even though he started the year with his high school team. Suddenly in September, he was graduated high school, or October, and by January, he was enrolling at Kentucky. And everyone vowed along the way that he was sitting out, most likely. They all at some point said he'd play if they need him, but the plan is for him to sit out this second half of Kentucky season. But he would definitely, 100%, no doubt about it, be at Kentucky next year. And so that was sort of, I think that's sort of the crux from the Kentucky perspective, and Kentucky fans, I think especially, that's kind of the crux of the frustration. And I do think it adds to some of the worry with NBA teams, that you've got a group of people that very clearly all along were telling the NBA side, like, Shaedon Sharpe's going to be in the draft. It was pretty clearly communicated. And to the last possible minute before Shaedon Sharpe finally came out and said, like, I think the day before the withdrawal deadline, I'm staying in the draft. to the last minute, it was still being communicated to Kentucky, like, hey, he might still come back to school. It was never. I just don't think it was ever the plan. And so that was when I say circus, the circus was sort of the will he won't he play one, because they did at least float the idea that if they needed him, he'd play. As I understand it, at one point they did need him because they had a bunch of guard injuries. Calipari would have been willing to play him, and his side sort of stepped in and stopped that from happening. I think that's a pretty worrisome thing. So that's part of the circus. And at one point Calipari said, there's some home game they wanted to get a bunch of people, a big crowd for. It was a big game, and Cal said, come early, get in your seats early, at least you can see Shaden in warm-ups. And that didn't help his cause, because it was sort of teasing the fan base. And then he didn't play, obviously, and continued to say, well, maybe we'll be back. And all the while, it was never going to happen. And now it's official. He's not coming back. And so I think there's kind of some frustration there. John Calipari, he is a master recruiter, and he's always playing the long game. And so he's not going to come out and throw anybody under the bus here. He's not going to even throw Dwayne Washington under the bus, because Dwayne may still be connected to a lot of top Canadian prospects, even if Cal is frustrated. I think he would be justifiably frustrated with this situation. But, that's all more, for your purposes. I don't know if anybody that follows the Kings cares if Kentucky fans are mad that Shaedon Sharpe kind of misled them and didn't play for them. But I do think it adds to the story of, like, one, it adds to the mystery, because we haven't seen him play competitive basketball in a long time, and two, it adds to the question of, like, okay, what is he made up of? Like, what's inside this kid? Because he saw a team that could have used him struggling down the stretch of the season. At one point, Kentucky looked like the best team in the country, and all three of their guards were banged up in one way or another, and he didn't play. I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, what does that mean about the kid?
Was there, and from my very loose grasp and loose understanding of the situation, was there any indication that he wanted to play but was stopped by his camp or his parents or his team?
I was told that he was open. He and his parents were open to playing if Calipari wanted him to play, and that Dwayne and whatever sort of advisory camp there was beyond Dwayne, but I think primarily Dwayne, stepped in and shut it down. And so, you could say that's not on the kid, but at some point you have to have some agency about yourself, and say, I'm the best. If I think I'm the best player in the country, and he has since during this draft process come out and said he wants to be the number one pick. He thinks he's the best player in the draft. And I do think he believes that. I mean, I think he is confident in himself. But if you're that guy, why would you hide your stuff? I know there's a lot of people on the NBA side that say, actually, he did the right thing. Like, he could have played and exposed himself and hurt his draft stock. And I get that. But I think also, if you're trying to draft a winner, if you're trying to draft a guy who's going to help, like, lead your lottery, your woe-begotten franchise that's in the lottery to newer heights, you want a winning sort of, I don't care what this costs me mentality. I want to play. I want to try to help these guys win. And so I think that's certainly a fair question that's on the table. And I'm not saying he's not a winner. I'm not saying he's scared. I'm not saying any of that. But I think you're finding out that teams worry about that, because then he went to the combine and he didn't play. Mm-hmm. And he's gone to these workouts and he has not put himself in any position, to my knowledge. And I've talked to some NBA folks who feel like he has not given anybody an opportunity to truly evaluate it. Shaden against the chair, Shaden against, his cousin, Shaden against some guy that played, in Latvia for a few years is in a workout setting, is not putting himself in position to truly be evaluated. And I think that has become a real question about teams that are trying to decide, GMs who are trying to decide, do I risk One, do I risk my career on drafting him? Two, do I risk my career on not drafting him? Because at a certain point, like there's a certain point at the top of the draft where you're risking your career to take him. And I think after you get outside the top five, those guys are in the rest of the lottery. Those GMs are risking their career by not taking him. Once you get to six, and because I think the top three, maybe even once you get to five, the top three, the big guys, Paolo, Chet, Jabari, are pretty well established. But then there's Jaden Ivey. And I think beyond that, now you go, okay, now am I risking my job by not taking him? But all the people who are asking both those questions are also asking these questions, like, what do we know about this kid? And what is too dangerous to not know to take him?
I think the big question for me is, and I've seen the high school mixtapes, you see the flash, the flair, you see, okay, this young man has incredible skill sets, but against high school opponents. The question for me is, and all the alarms in my head that go off are, what is he hiding? What is his camp hiding? I understand, like, you could lower your draft stock by not playing good at Kentucky. You could, I guess, lower your draft stock a little bit by having a rough few workouts at the combine. But to be this consistent with, we're not going to show you anything that has anything remotely to do with live action basketball, suggests that he's hiding something. And that would freak me out as a general manager. It freaks me out as a media member more than it would, I'm worried about losing my job because I didn't take a flyer on him. I understand if the mystery is somehow making him more appealing or keeping that draft stock high. But if I were a general manager at this point, I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this because I have no idea what this is.
And I think there are several teams who feel that way. I think what his camp is betting on is that the mystery will help. But I think in a lot of cases it has hurt. Especially because, again, like, if you are that dude, if you're the guy you and everybody around you thinks you are, feeling like you got to hide to get drafted high is kind of an odd thing to me. One of my best friends, J. Kyle Mann, he works for The Ringer. He does a lot of sort of prospect breakdowns. He just had a thing come out. He actually also happens to be a Kentucky fan. He had a thing come out, sort of really a deep dive on Shaedon Sharpe. And I think there's some mystery because, like, when he was just in high school basketball in Canada, before he started getting moved around to these prep schools and stuff, he looked like he had motive. And Kyle found some footage that I had not seen. I mean, you could see him really playing on defense and looking like the way he played looked like a winning mentality. And he became a different kind of player. He became passive at the first school he went to, and then he became like this very high usage. I think he shot when he was at the last school, he shot something like 215 shots in 320 minutes. I mean, he it was high usage. And so there's that mystery there, but also I think one of the things that Kyle sort of spoke to is, now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry. I was going somewhere and I got sidetracked by the usage, the way he played. But I think bottom line is, I think the real worry here is just not knowing, just not knowing, what guy is he, and the other thing is he hasn't talked a lot. I don't know what I'd be very curious to see what his NBA interviews were like, because everyone described him to me as this like painfully shy kid. There were a couple of examples when he was at Kentucky and he was out. He would go out for warmups with the team and they'd be in a hostile road environment, and like he'd be shooting and a ball would like roll into the opposing student section, and he looked like he was like tiptoeing over to get it. I mean, that's a question I have. What is his personality? Is he the person? Does he have the personality of a guy who you're going to take in the top 5 or whatever, and hope will be the guy who changes your bad franchise? Is he going to be a guy who takes criticism well, public scrutiny, and all of that? We haven't. He gave like 2 interviews, and they were all sort of connected to like the UK official UK sort of media arm, not to any of us. That's a big question too.
Mm.
I mean, it's a grown man's world. Shaden is an 18-year-old. I think he'll be 19. I think he will be 19 by the time he begins his rookie season. But he's a young. He was not some reclass because he was already 20 years old. I mean, he's an 18-year-old kid, shy, quiet, has had to do almost no media appearances and be sort of out in that spotlight. There's just so many things we don't know. I wish I could come on here and say like I can answer all these things. I don't. We don't. That's the whole thing. There aren't any good answers. But then there's also this sort of tantalizing idea that what if you don't take him and all of the raw, because I do think it's inarguable that like the raw materials are elite. He's an elite athlete. He's explosive. He handles the ball. He scores. He can score at will. I mean, you saw him at the last real competitive setting was that Peach Jam last summer, where that's a high level event, and he was really really good at it. But AAU basketball is not NBA basketball. We're using college basketball. I've seen some guys blow up the Peach Jam and then come to Kentucky and pee down their leg. So he's one of the most fascinating cases in a long time because like I said, they've bet that the mystery is good, and I think NBA teams are terrified by their bet and by their sort of stance on not letting him be evaluated.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to carry and stock all the parts that you need. Why would you endure pointless, sometimes intimidating questioning about these car parts that are so specific when they only carry, if they carry anything at all, they only carry their brand at their set price point. You have no negotiation power. You're pretty much stuck. It's both that way at the chain store and at the dealership. Instead, you can go to rockauto.com where you can save 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts. Example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, $353 at your local chain store, $216 on average from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything you need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. They have it all. Go explore their easy-to-use website today. Find the solution to your auto parts needs. And when you go, write Locked On in there, how did you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. You mentioned earlier, you said that you don't know how much Sacramento Kings fans care about Kentucky and Kentucky fans being pissed off. I actually think a great deal, because even though it has nothing to do with Kentucky, it's more of a Duke angle. Sacramento just wrapped up this whole saga with Marvin Bagley, where there was over involvement with Marvin Bagley's camp, frustrations voiced by Marvin Bagley's camp. Marvin, he tried to play, got injured way too much. So it's different in that circumstance, but there was a lot of off the court drama that enhanced some of the on-court drama and overall issues between the franchise and Bagley. And by the way, that was not all on Marvin Bagley. Plenty of that goes on the Sacramento Kings as well. So I think the idea of the Kings, the last time they moved up in the lottery, they took Bagley over Luka. We all know how that went. Bagley's no longer here. The idea of potentially replicating that after moving up again, this time to number 4, taking someone who might have a camp, whether it's his parents, whether it's his advisors, his agents, saying, hey, don't play, or hey, you're gonna do this, or we're gonna go in making demands day one. I think that scares the hell out of Kings fans. And even though it's not the same front office that drafted Marvin Bagley, that might be in the back of the Kings' mind as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say to be fair is Dwayne Washington has had who from everything I gather has pushed all the buttons here.
Mm-hmm.
He's had some really successful guys that have had no issues. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is like this incredible success story. I mean, it's one of the reasons. I think another kind of Kentucky-centric thing is there's a lot of fans that are like, "How did Cal get duped here?" Right? Part of it is this is a guy he trusted because of the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander thing. And Shai, I think, to this day, considers Dwayne a close confidant and friend and advisor, and they love him in Oklahoma City. I mean, he's sort of a dream player. And, RJ Barrett, I think, has blossomed, and, I don't think has had any, there were some questions about him being sort of like just a ball. We talk about usage, being a ball hog at Duke. But I think he's kind of coming into his own. I don't think there's been issues there. And so I do think because of all these relationships in this long time that he's been a factor in these high level guys, like it seems that Dwayne would probably have good relationships in the NBA, and maybe those transcend the questions about how he's handled Shaden. And I'm sure he's got an explanation for why he did it this way. I mean, the other thing is maybe he did act in the best interest of Shaedon Sharpe. Like, if you're hiding him, maybe there's a good reason to hide him, and you get him drafted in the top 10 and he's got concerns and he still got paid. In that case, he did right by the kid and screw everybody else. And frankly, I'm big on that. Like, I don't care if Kentucky gets screwed over. I mean, I have no dog in that fight. If it's best for the kid, fine. I think they should have just been upfront. Like, the best way to handle it would have been to say, we're coming to Kentucky. The plan is to sit out. And then after the season, we'll explore the draft. And if he's a high pick, we'll leave. To put that up front instead of like, we're definitely coming back. That I think frustrated people. But I can't say for sure that Dwayne ultimately wasn't looking out for the kid's best interest. And so in that case, is that worrisome because of all these pre-existing relationships he has around the NBA? Are people less worried about that? Maybe. I don't know. I do think there's concern about not seeing him more. But and I don't get the sense that Dwayne has overly interfered in any of these other guys' situations. The difference is Dwayne was actively trying to be Shaden's agent. He went and took the agent certification. He did not pass. He's not actually, officially his agent, but I think he will be acting in some capacity as that. And so he's much more heavily involved. Instead of sending guys on, in this case, he seems to be following this player to the next level. And so are you going to have Dwayne, is Dwayne going to be living in Shaden's house? Is he going to be living in next door? Is he going to be at the practice facility every day? If that's the case, I'm sure that nobody wants that.
Well, regardless of my opinion or any really opinion on how Shaden and his camp have handled everything, I look at the Sacramento Kings situation. I look at a team that has notoriously not only struggled in the draft, but has struggled to develop talent. I look at a team that has basically 2 years with Domantas Sabonis after that trade to start to win basketball games, or he probably walks and then the reset button is hit again. I take in all these factors and I ask the question, are the Sacramento Kings the right team to take this risk, to take this flyer when there are other, I guess, safer picks like a Jaden Ivey I'm a big fan of Keegan Murray available? And my question, or my answer to that, is a resounding no. And it was like the same kind of question I asked when the Kings were considering hiring Mark Jackson. It's like, here's this coach that hasn't been an NBA coach for years, has gotten a lot of interviews. No team has given him the opportunity. Are the Kings on a 16-year playoff drought really the right team to give him the opportunity? I kind of look at it the same way with Shaedon Sharpe. In your mind, does Shaden need to go to like an established NBA program that can be patient, an NBA franchise that can be patient with him, you think, and that lowers the risk a little bit? Or do you think he needs to go somewhere where he's going to get a lot of playing time day one and just develop on the floor?
No, I think that's another point I was going to make. And so I'm glad you brought it up. Like, that's a good question to ask for the Kings, but also, a good question to ask for Shaden. Like, what scenario does he thrive in? And I do think it needs to be an organization that is, noted for its development, that maybe has the luxury of being patient. I mean, like, I'm interested to see if he slides on draft night. Is Oklahoma City the team that breaks his fall at 12? Because they have that relationship. They already, there's somebody that, in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I think has already a relationship as well with Shaden, and, would be a great mentor. I mean, he's the kind of guy who I think is like I said, he's been a dream for them,
Mhm.
and I think he's good at taking guys under his wing. He's got excellent leadership skills. I think anybody that takes Shaden is like, you're going to lead us day one is probably that's gonna be a failed experiment. But if he goes to a place where there are other options and creators and leaders, and he can just sort of figure it out over time and maybe ease his way in a little bit, um, I think that's a much better scenario. Going to a place that's like, okay, we desperately need help. uh, we're going to play you 40 minutes a night and try to let you score 25 points. Is that going to go bad? Probably. I mean, because I think he could go do it, but is it going to be pretty? Is it going to be efficient? Is it going to be good basketball? Mm. Probably not. I mean, does a kid who hasn't played competitive basketball is 18 years old and hasn't played competitive basketball in a year, is he going to step in day one and play good, smart, efficient, high IQ basketball? Seems really unlikely. Is he going to step right in and have great feel for NBA basketball when he hasn't played anything resembling high level competition in well over a year? I mean, it seems preposterous to me that he would.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast, as many episodes in the past have been brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar's got new caramel brownie, or rather the caramel brownie bar is back, and it was a massive favorite last time, meaning if you're a fan of it, you are going to want to go to built.com right now and order it because they go quickly. You want that brownie, you want that caramel swirl on top, but you don't want all those calories that come with it. You can get a caramel brownie Built Bar. It's healthy for you, and it tastes just as good, if not better, than an actual caramel covered brownie. Check this out: 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar in these bars. That's significantly better than an actual brownie, even without the caramel. Plus, they have their new granola bars, they have their marshmallow puffs, so many other flavors of Built Bars for you to try. Whatever you get at built.com, make sure you use our promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Last thing I have for you, Kyle, of course, you cover Kentucky so closely, and I've actually been reading a little bit about the incoming class. I know a lot of people have their eyes on the 2023 draft, so I'm hoping the Kings aren't in a position to consider the top of the 2023 draft like they seem to be every year. If they are, then I'll have you back on, and we'll talk about that later on. But I mentioned both Jaden Ivey and Keegan Murray. The two of them and Shaedon Sharpe have kind of been in that next tier conversation around that 4 range. Most people think Jaden Ivey should be the pick there. I like Keegan Murray because of the fit. I also think that he had an extremely impressive season, and his ceiling could be higher than most people think, even though they think he's kind of older and safer and maybe a little less exciting than Jaden Ivey. But based off of what you've seen of those two players, and even any of the top 3 that you want to talk about as well, what do you think about the top of this draft outside of Shaedon Sharpe?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we mentioned the 3 big guys. They're going to be gone, I would assume, all. Unless Ivy. I mean, I think there's a chance there's a world in which maybe he slips into the top 3 and one of those guys, and then you've got that choice to make. Like if Chet Holmgren falls out of the top 3 and you're the Kings, like,
yep,
that's another gamble, but I'd take that gamble over the other. I like Ivy a lot. I think all the things we were just talking about, like. He grew up in basketball. He's got such an interesting story. Like he grew up with a single mother who was a WNBA, college star, WNBA player, college assistant, now head coach at Notre Dame. He learned the game from his mom. His first basketball idol was Skylar Diggins, and he learned how to play basketball and think basketball at a high level from like childhood. His father, who I guess has not really been in the picture, but his father was an NFL player. His mother was a WNBA player. So he's obviously got the good, just natural gifts, great natural talent. But when you pair that with somebody who's just been thinking about basketball every waking minute of his life since he's been around it. I mean, like his after school program was to go shag balls for, Skylar Diggins. He's watching Notre Dame cut down the nets. And so I think that combination is really And then when you see him play, I mean, when you know that background, and then you see the high level that he played at Purdue, uh, you talk about safe picks. I mean, I think the floor is really high. I don't know what the ceiling is, but the floor is really high. I don't think you're going to draft him and get a bust. And so, I would probably go that way. I love Keegan Murray too. He was a guy we did Athletic. We did a list of the top 20 wing. We did top 20 wings, guards, bigs, and I was in charge of doing the wings last summer. And you do a list like that, like all across college basketball. I'm not qualified to do that. So you make a lot of phone calls, right? You call around and ask, who's going to be good this year? And at that point, Keegan, I think as a freshman, Keegan Murray was like 5 points and 3 rebounds, and he was a nobody. But people were saying, multiple people said to me last summer, like, man, the Iowa staff is saying Keegan Murray is going to be like a bona fide superstar. And I was like, ooh, that seems like a risk to put a guy who averaged 5 points or whatever it was on my list, but I'll do it. There was so much positive feedback. And then you saw this guy, he just went nuclear. He was, lighting people up. He's a really, really gifted scorer. And, I think his body is good. And so, the sort of just the physical tools there, I would be comfortable with either one of those guys, that high in the draft. And again, probably above Shaedon Sharpe, just because, like, I think Shaedon Sharpe's ceiling is higher than both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But his floor is way lower. Like, I just because there's too much unknown.
Kyle, you do such phenomenal work. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to have you on, especially this time of the year where everything's so chaotic. Excellent work covering this era of Kentucky basketball. You did a phenomenal job with very little answers. And I really appreciate you taking the time here on Locked On Kings. Hopefully we'll be able to chat about some Kentucky Kings connections in the future. And of course, I know you have to keep some eye on Sacramento Kings basketball because of De'Aaron Fox still being here. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate Kyle taking the time here to come on the Locked On Kings podcast and share some of that insight and some of his perspective on the unknown that is Shaedon Sharpe. And hey, maybe you're a Shaedon Sharpe guy. Maybe you think he is the right risk for the Sacramento Kings to take. If so, tell me why. At MattGeorgeSack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But it seems like those who I've talked to seem to agree he's just not the right risk for the Kings to take. Now, he could get taken by Detroit at 5. He could get taken by Indiana at 6. Could fall, like Kyle was saying, all the way to Oklahoma City at 12. And then he turns into this phenomenal player that when we look back at this draft 4 or 5 years later, we go, wow, he was a risk, but boy, did the reward pay off. If that's the case, that's something I personally can live with from a Sacramento Kings perspective compared to all the other draft blunders that the Kings have had in their history. But again, that's just me. Appreciate you taking the time here on Locked On Kings. The next episode of Locked On Kings, we're going to talk about the possibility of the Kings using whoever they draft at number 4, plus salary filler and maybe future draft picks, to execute a sign and trade for Zach LaVine, who theoretically is available from the Chicago Bulls. The Kings tried to sign Zach LaVine a few years ago, and the Chicago Bulls matched the offer, taking him away from the Kings. Could now be the time for the Kings to really make their move, even though it's a completely different front office that could be targeting him. It's pretty 50-50 split between people that I talked to about Zach LaVine. Yes, the Kings should go for it. No, the Kings should avoid it. We'll talk about and hash out both sides of that debate on the next episode of Locked On Kings. So I hope you will join me for that. We're so close to our goal of 350 reviews on Apple Podcasts for the Locked On Kings podcast. I think we're in the 340s now. If you could get us over 350, I'm buying a pair of opening night lower bowl Kings tickets, and I will be giving them away to a pair of Locked On Kings listeners. So help me get over that 350 review hump if you can. I appreciate all your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.